Good afternoon, Nate. Thank you for filling in while your brother is out of town.
Well, thanks for having me.
I've just started off by disclosing who you are, but for anyone who doesn't know, Nathan writes and edits and films and takes photos and does all kinds of things for MAEKAN, and he also happens to be Eugene's younger brother.
Guilty as charged.
If at the point in this podcast in the middle, you're like, you forget that it's Nate, it's totally understandable. Similar voice. So what happened to you this week? What's been going on?
Well, mostly just trying to get a few things, on editorial side, just getting some stories up that are actually coming from some of our contributors. So we're pretty excited to hear some new voices, get some new takes on things. So that's been very exciting.
Okay, can I tell you about a guilty pleasure that I've been indulging in for the past week?
Please.
I downloaded the New York Times crossword app and have been paying money for it because it costs money. Okay, so they give you a 7-day trial and then it costs money. And now I've just been doing more than one a day, or attempting to do more than one a day, because I've just been addicted. So, but as far as addictions go, I think this one's not, it's not unhealthy per se.
I think that's a healthy vice to have. And I mean, I feel like that's something I should have. Like, how much is it?
Gosh, I forgot. Because it's like a monthly subscription.
That sounds like a great way to build vocabulary.
7-day trial. So go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for
join me. And then when I get stuck, I'll just message you.
Oh, that sounds great. Okay. Yeah, let's definitely do it. I definitely want to try this out.
Okay. I'm keen. I've been converting people slowly. All right. So, it's kind of funny. I saw a theme in our 2 topics that we picked. I don't know if you saw it too.
I saw it.
I'm going to call this the dystopia episode.
Agreed. That's a very apt description.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk to you about is this Wired article that was published that talks about big data meeting Big Brother as China moves to rate its citizens. And the plan in place, this article is written by Rachel Botsman, and it was published this month. And the plan in place by the government was actually announced 3 years ago. So it's not necessarily something new, but I think it's not been covered a lot. I don't know. Did you hear about this before?
No, this is the first, when you brought it up to me, that's the first time I'd heard of, this social credit system. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, what it is that the government in China is planning this system to assign citizens trust scores. And just so the number is out there, China has 1.3 billion people. So this is a lot of people, a lot of scoring, and it's a current voluntary system. There's a couple of pilot programs that they've got underway, but it's going to become mandatory by 2020 to be part of this. So the pilots that they have in place, it's funny because it makes so much sense that it's run by these companies. So the 2 pilots, one is run by Tencent, which owns WeChat, and the other one is run by Alibaba / Alipay. Both are huge players in China. And the reason why I said, this makes a lot of sense that these are the 2 companies running the pilots is because basically everyone in China is already using these services, voluntarily. Yeah. They choose to use WeChat and Alipay to text their friends and blog and pay for taxis and pay for restaurant bills, everything. And so there's no need for the government to coerce people to go onto these platforms. They're already there. And the reason why I picked this, I didn't pick this to talk about, China's political state, because I don't think that's necessarily our area of expertise. But I picked this because I think about how we in not China, the people who are not in China, opt to voluntarily give up our information to different services, and how actually the whole social credit system is not that far-fetched. Right.
I read too, the general reaction from, I guess anybody in the Western world hearing this is it's straight out of 1984. It's Orwellian or whatever. But I think we also fail to consider how much we have actually signed off on similar, similar services like, Facebook. So many people have Facebook, and just the amount of data we're already giving up.
Yep.
It's, it's unconscious now, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just the second we hear, I'm going to drop the reference, but now that we hear about a social credit system that can actually impact your life and even the lives of people around you, that's straight out of Black Mirror for anyone who's seen that episode.
Yeah. But you can describe it if you want.
Basically, it got to the point where you would rate your individual interactions with everybody you saw. So if you got a cup of coffee and you were not satisfied, you would instantly not rate the shop, but you would rate the person that just served you.
Yeah.
And if you fall below a certain rating, less than like 3 or something, you'll start to, I don't know, you could lose your job. You could lose the chance to live in a gated community.
Yep.
Very direct impacts on your day-to-day life.
I see there's one standby seat on another plane leaving tonight.
Okay.
That's reserved for members of our Prime Flight program. You got to be a 4.2 or over to qualify.
Oh, I'm a 4.2.
I'm afraid you're actually a 4.183.
Oh. Well, that's not my fault. Some woman dinged me down in the couch. Can't you just...
I'm sorry, it won't let me book it without the correct ranking.
But it's so close.
There's just nothing I can do.
Christ, I mean, surely.
I'm going to have to ask you to moderate your language then.
Yeah. And actually, that's one part of the China social credit system that's particularly interesting because there are certain parts of it that's not surprising. Mm-hmm. So the part that's not surprising is the credit history part, which is something that's common in the States anyway. To keep track of, are you paying your bills? Like, how did you do paying off your mortgage, right? Like, I think that's commonly tracked, those large financial situations. But the thing that's less common is to have other individuals rate you, like you're describing from Black Mirror, and having that then affect your access and affect, what privileges you might have. And that's kind of scary to think that because we're colleagues, like Nate could rate me as a coworker, on a scale of 1 to 10, and that could be like public record.
And the other way around too is like, it's just, the scary thing is like with credit ratings, like that's been around so long to the point of, it's understandable. I guess it's accepted with money is concerned, the amount you're paying back and like how soon you're paying it back. Those are fairly quantifiable things. But the issue is also that, you're going to be rated on things that are not easily quantifiable, right? Like I think, because this is in the end to, enforce a desired social behavior or set of behaviors. And I don't know, like, let's just say, for example, somebody smiled less. And at the end, sorry, just take a step back here. The basic idea is to raise or rate someone's trustworthiness. Mm-hmm. And how do you turn that into a number, right?
Yeah, it's very subjective because it's not, like you said, it's not based off of something quantifiable, like that we can all agree on, such as currency. And actually, to tie this back into kind of our worlds of, creativity and technology, do you remember the news item with People, the app spelled Peeple?
I don't quite remember. Could you jog my memory?
Okay. So People was founded in 2014 by these two women, and it was announced in late 2015. And basically it was described as Yelp for people. And what it is it allows people like anyone, you and me, individuals, to leave recommendations for other individuals based off of whatever they wanted, and professional, personal, romantic attachments. Right. And it was immediately like super controversial. And everyone was like, this is a terrible idea and needs to be abandoned immediately.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned that because I hadn't heard of People. But I remember once upon a time I was in university and there was ratemyprofessor.com.
Yeah.
And even though that's just for professors, it just takes one disgruntled student to just, and I think that's, kind of already a thing with, our social media heavy, world now.
Yeah. It also reminds me of Glassdoor, which we don't find problematic. So Glassdoor is the website where coworkers or former coworkers can rate their workplaces and say, it's an anonymous place where you could say, they pay late or they gave me a bad severance package or whatever it is, right? But it's like, I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate and say, maybe rating is not always a bad thing, because we've let these kind of rating sites come into our lives in different ways.
Right. You know, things like just food reviews, like if generally speaking, if you, it incentivizes a certain behavior, which could mean, you know, better service or better incentives for the people using them. So that is one positive you could see to this.
Yeah.
Basically, the issue I have though is because it's just such a big set of things to be rated in this, you know, in this project that China's doing, and it's obviously done by vested interests.
Yes.
So, and the other issue is that 2020 is only, you know, less than 3 years away. You know, I don't know all the ins and outs, but China has a history of doing these large projects that basically mobilize the entire country behind a given goal. And while it's great if you want compliance, the impacts of it are really hard to predict, right?
It is interesting because the Wired article does talk to some people in China, and there was one interviewee who said that maybe the social credit system is not such a bad thing because at least it provides a degree of transparency, in the sense that you know what China is doing. Like, you know how the government is judging you.
Right.
Because Chinese citizens, you know, they accept we're being judged regardless, but with the SCS, maybe we can game it in a way. Like, we can see what's happening.
Right. Yeah. The gamification thing was probably a very, I think that was a pretty accurate way to describe it, because it's not, I mean, there are obviously more coercive means that China probably employs that they might not elsewhere, but this gamification is in some ways, like, it makes sense for people to make more people comply with it. But the issue is, though, I mean, this is a very seemingly Chinese thing, I guess, is it's not just you. So if you say something controversial and your rating goes down, you also bring down your circle too, people in, you know, your friends and family too, which means the control aspect definitely, it runs itself, because, you know, maybe, like, again, we're coworkers. It's like, oh, Charisse, are you sure you want to say that controversial thing? My rating's not doing great alone, so maybe you'd better not do that for our sake.
Right. I do think about, so I was reading this article, and we live on the edge of China, so it's not so far-fetched to imagine this affecting our lives in really real ways, where if we choose to use WeChat and Alipay, we're also in this Chinese database and it might affect us. But what's interesting to me still is how Western media is approaching this degree without it being a government enforced thing. One thing the article brought up as a metaphor was Uber and Yelp. So on Uber, you rate the driver, but the driver also rates you.
Right.
So it is a kind of co-surveillance thing. Surveillance makes it sound really dark and dystopic, but it is, right? Like, you rate me, I rate you. And also for Yelp, like, you have a rating as a reviewer, like you can be a novice or an expert or whatever, like how trustworthy your reviews are.
That's true.
And also, like, restaurants have reviews, right? So
that's so true. That makes, like, I think it just, I think that should be really the takeaway for a lot of people who see this for the first time is, I mean, it sounds like, you know, like it's like, I don't know, like the sky is falling, that kind of reaction, but you actually are involved in these kinds of transactions, these interactions already. You just have been using them so long, or you adopted it so quickly, you just didn't realize it.
And I think also we, unfortunately, we're not clever, and we have given private companies a lot of our data, a lot of control. You know, we don't really read terms and conditions, and we've signed over. We're so willing to accept whatever these private services, you know, do in our lives, but we trust that they're not going to turn around and then, you know, okay, I know this is going to sound very Black Mirror-ish, but like sell our information to the government.
Right.
I know I sound like a conspiracy
No.
theorist, but just like
this is if there was a time for you and I to put on our tinfoil hats, this would be the time. Like,
because like I think about, there's been all of these crime cases before, right? Where like there's some suspect, like there's been some homicide, and then the police think the suspect could be it, and they want like access to their iPhone and Facebook and Instagram and whatever it is.
Right.
And then in like that situation, do the private companies agree?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and a lot of that hinges on like you support it because you're like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything that's rattling any cages. So there's no reason for my data to be of any value. So yeah, sure, just take it. If it makes my life easier, my really high speed, stressful life easier, please take my information.
But what's so interesting about the way you phrase that is our perception that, the data we're giving is clean anyway. So it's like we're self-monitoring already.
Right.
Like, is what's on record okay with the government or not? Like we somehow have an idea.
Yeah.
It's freaky.
Okay. So the government, I guess it's kind of like a blur between who do you trust? Like, do you trust big governments or big like corporations? Because you hope you trust the government has your best interests in mind, and hopefully the corporations, because they just want you to buy more stuff. But if we assume these like interactions are still just pure like transparency, right? Mm-hmm. I rate the company, they rate me as a customer. But there was also discussion that these interactions could, be subverted like later. Like, for example, if my score is not doing well, maybe I made a few mistakes, maybe I was late to work a few more times than I'd liked, I could either hire a consultant to, advise me on how can I raise my social credit, or can you go into the code a bit and just give me a few more like bumps?
Yeah. Well, with any, I thought about this too, like with any system that you erect, there's going to be a way to hijack that, to use it in your favor, to work around it.
And it already has been done with, buying Instagram likes, Facebook likes. It's so in a lot of ways, I guess.
Or feeding something wrong information. There's that too. It's still possible with the SES as well. Like you could intentionally make misleading purchases or, cloak yourself in some way.
Yeah.
God, Eugene is going to listen to this and he's just going to be like, you two became conspiracy theorists on the podcast. I actually wanted to also use this topic to plug a book I read a while ago now. It was published in 2010, but it's really relevant to this SES. It's called Super Sad True Love Story by Gary Steingart. And what exists in the book is exactly what's described. It's just so accurate. It was like how, you watch Black Mirror episodes and you think like that's going to become reality. Same thing for this book. So I think I'm actually going to revisit it to see how it might inform how I should navigate the SES. When it comes to fictional dystopias, there's a lot that we could read up on, watch.
I could talk for hours on dystopias, but
which is perfect because we still have another half of this segment.
Which I will use that as a segue into my topic, if I may. So the topic that I read up on was Adobe. They conducted a survey of about 600 creative workers on basically their opinion of AI advances. And what they had found was the majority of junior ones, which could probably imply younger creatives, support these advances and they think it's going to make their jobs easier. But on the other hand, the ones that think AI is coming for our jobs is mostly senior ones. In this case, 48% of the ones who thought it was going to take their jobs were senior creatives. Even though the findings found that senior creatives thought this way, there's actually very little cause for concern because of the advances in AI that they're going to apply to, I assume, just Adobe products. are more the ones that just get rid of the, the
Like what?
menial
Like what
tasks,
kind
like
of
tagging
tasks?
photos, like maybe content where stuff that, the stuff that really isn't that creative, like
something that's kind of repetitive or tedious.
Right.
Those sort of
the
tasks.
things you don't go to school for. You don't
Mhm.
you don't take a course on tagging photos or file naming,
Yeah.
right? So that was the basic idea there, that there's no cause for concern. There was another article I read where he was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. His name was John Zimmerman. He said that most of the AI is too complex for creatives to really use it in a way that could replace a person. Like
Okay.
machine learning, developing an AI, and
Like as in developing AI is too difficult right now for us to modify for our own purposes.
yeah, like you couldn't, I guess to frame it in a creative's world, the majority of design work is iterative. It comes off of getting, like say a client's preferences and tailoring a product to meet their needs. Right.
Mhm.
And I guess the fear, the panic would be, what if they created an AI designer
Right.
that could replace a human, just like a robot is replacing an auto factory worker.
Right.
So his opinion is that these systems are too complex for creatives to use them, but also there's no integration into the creative workflow. Like
As of now, does he suggest that it could happen in the future?
maybe if the education changed, like he compared user experience and AI are very separate things. Basically, you would not use a machine like an AI to do that type of work anyways, and you're not being trained to do it in your education in your schooling and all that. So right now there isn't a very like palpable connect between the two.
Do you see where AI could be useful in your workflow?
In my workflow, well, it already is, and that actually leads me to my next point: is the idea of a robo designer is pretty far off. But a lot of us already use things that use AI, like content aware. That that comes from the results of like lots of data and algorithms to spot heal, color grade, like those kinds of things are immediately useful to us, right? We use those. That's where I can see it being useful, but where I also see the threat of AI advances there, because Adobe has actually created an engine or a technology called Voco, which is basically content aware for audio. So I will include this later, but there's a clip where they hosted a session with, they include Jordan Peele, the comedian, and they took off of 20 minutes of his speech. They were able to make him say things he had never said before.
So I heard that actually on that day, Michael actually kissed our Jordan. So sorry. To recover the truth, let's do it. So let's remove the word "my" here.
Your secret's out, Jordan.
And just type the word Jordan. And here we go.
And I kissed Jordan and my dogs.
Oh, that's so freaky.
That is where I see it being an issue, because you get somebody who's really good with Photoshop and they can,
yeah. I've read about this as well.
Yeah. I mean, generally we're getting better at seeing, where the issue is, because, eyes, we can say, oh, the shadow's off here, or the time of day doesn't matter. Like that doesn't match. But for audio, your ears could probably fool you.
Well, okay, I genuinely thought that this conversation was going somewhere else in discussing digital tools, but to go off of what you're talking about, like where we can, fake audio, fake video, even, humans are actually really bad at figuring, we shared this in the briefing before too. We're really bad at figuring out if something is fake or not.
We are, yeah.
Like photos, we're not as good as we think we are, like about shadows and whether something was photoshopped in. And the tools are now so good, like as you've described with Adobe, that anyone can fake a thing and have probably lots of people believe it's real.
I watched something on Netflix. They're talking about, you know, the Shroud of Turin or whatever, but basically they thought they found inscriptions in this religious artifact, but the mind is also capable of filling in blanks where it thinks it sees letters. And I just see all sorts of problems for audio, video, and still images.
But you know, what's interesting is that the solution is not to slow down advancements in technology. Like we're not going to be able to slow down Adobe's content aware getting better, the Voco getting better. Like it's just going to improve until any child could, you know, modify audio that way. So what I think has to happen is there has to be, well, one, there has to be education for more people on reality and, you know, fake photos, fake video, etc. And then also technology that can check whether something is real or not.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what that looks like. I'm not savvy enough to tell you like what an audio checker tool is, but it would have to be able to go through the Voco creation and verify like, oh, you know, this isn't something Jordan Peele would say. Right.
I think they did mention something about like an audio watermark of sorts. And, you know, I think that's just, you know, that's ethically a thumbs up from me, but it's also just good business being able to create a parallel technology to go. It's a fail safe in a lot of ways. To go back to that survey, the explanation for the findings was the junior creatives are more willing to accept advances in AI because they're newer to their respective fields. Yeah. So they have fewer ingrained processes, you know, that make them more open to anything that just makes their job easier. Whereas the senior level ones, like they've been working at this for so long in the industry that they have, you know, their processes, their workflows down to a T. So this new, it seems like a gadget, like a widget. This thing better improve my game at least, say 10% for me to consider it, right?
I have a couple of comments on that. One is I have been a junior designer before, and I also understand why the results of this survey are the way they are, because a lot of a junior designer's responsibilities are menial and boring and repetitive, and they would love to have AI take over those tasks. When I was an intern, I've spent countless hours removing the backgrounds on objects. So I've done art objects, I've done grocery items, just like if Adobe could develop a tool that was able to remove the backgrounds to objects as well as like a human can, I'm all for it. You know, it would save everyone a lot of time. And the other thing I wanted to say was I don't want to be one of those designers, and same for you as a writer. I don't want to be a creative who glorifies some kind of labor intensive process. Do you know what I mean? Like, if something comes along and it can improve your workflow and make it better, I wouldn't want to stick to the long way of doing things just to, you know, make myself sound like
just for brownie points, for ego, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, oh, I did this the long, hard way.
It's funny that you're bringing this up because I have not written this in my notes, but it seems you've read my mind. I was thinking, does the long way have like, because obviously you can't be a creative, like you can't be extremely good at your work. You can't be completely successful just relying on these tools anyways. It, like you said, just gets rid of the really menial stuff that you've probably started your career doing. I was going to say, I feel like these tools should be valued and should continue to be developed, but you should only really like start using them after you've done, you know, the hard way. Let's just say, I don't know, you've done it for like 10 hours. You know how it's supposed to be done. Now, please give me like something to change that. Because I feel by doing these small, like little tasks over a few times, you do learn some extra skills in the process that you might miss out on. Like, I'm not saying I need to be able to grade a photo. Like right now, my photo work is not the point I can grade completely from scratch. I rely on presets, right? But I feel I've missed out on something by not grading completely from scratch once. Maybe do it once, maybe 10 times, enough for me to, like, I don't know, hate life. Then we start using the presets to know what they actually do. I think that's the value.
I see your point. I do see your point. Because also when you take the time to do things from zero, you might learn something in that process that could be modified in a way that AI wouldn't know how to modify it.
Right.
Or you wouldn't even know enough to tell AI to modify it in this way. Because sometimes maybe you want to break up a process. You want to do something slightly different. And if you just went straight for the automated option, you wouldn't even be aware of what other things you could do.
Right. And another thing too is integrating that automated process into your workflow. It might not necessarily be smooth. There could be something that it does out of the box that you don't want it to, that you have to go back later to fix. So I guess it just comes down to, you got to know yourself, know which is the biggest pain point of the biggest pain point, and find something to automate that. And then,
I do. It's funny because I was so sure I was going to say, like, if the robots come and they can do, 90% of my job, and the 90% is all of the less creative work, and that lets me focus on the really good problem solving creative stuff, like, let the robots come, But now that you've mentioned that, it does take away from being I don't know how to phrase this. It does take away from the full dimension of being a creative.
Yeah, I think, like, there's definitely a distinct human touch, human element in there that you assume can't be replaced anytime soon. But like you said, where's that magic number where it's a watershed moment for AI creation? Is it 50% of my workflow, 90% of it? I should mention that the biggest, although I said a robo designer is still ways off, the biggest danger that comes from them is, like, how you would probably present a lot of options to a client, like a lot of different variations. They would be able to do that really quickly, but they might also do things that you might not have thought of because of you have your own set of beliefs, your own biases and stuff. But an AI doesn't think that way. They think this, according to this algorithm, this is the most visually attractive piece. And we could not have thought of that, but they thought about it. They submitted it to a client likes it. And I don't know. It's just,
well, I mean, there are I get a lot of potential jobs where I think if I could just pop out, like, if the client could just access a new AI generated logo, it would serve their purposes. Because sometimes there are cases where they just want a logo that looks like their competitors in that industry, but it's just slightly different and it's using their name. And I don't know if maybe in that case you really don't need to get a human involved.
right.
Maybe that's that saves us all time. I'm not sure. On one hand, it sounds like I shouldn't encourage more automated work, but on the other hand, I think maybe increased automation will give us freedom to do other stuff.
Yeah, I think that's definitely how I see it. Like, I'm pretty optimistic about technology. Like, just in case people listening to this think that, I've been watching Terminator 2 too much. I do think that what AI and technology has done for me as a creative, it's allowed me to just create more things across different fields. Whereas, way back when, I couldn't have thought of taking pictures, illustrating in Illustrator, just doing all these things because it would have taken way too much time to learn.
Yeah.
So if if technology enables me to amplify my creativity, then yeah, I'm all for it.
Chris Lim, the MAEKAN
Our
photographer,
photographer.
didn't know how to use Adobe Bridge to rename files. And I saw him one day going through like hundreds of photos and renaming them like with the date and timestamp, etc.
Right.
And I said, there's something you can do that automates that and I'll do it in a second. And his mind was just like blown, right? So that's an example of really good use. And then I also think about, I don't know what this looks like yet, but similar to how we were talking on my topic about whenever a system is in place, people can break it.
Right.
I imagine when AI is even more common, we can use it to create art in interesting ways.
Right.
It's like how people use content aware in Photoshop to create like really interesting content aware compositions.
Right. That's something that, like, I guess just to balance it out, that's the light side of it, is these technologies will let you, just do that much more. And many, many more people will be able to do that much more. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, AI, whether it be the social credit system or for creative technologies, these algorithms are all designed by a programmer or like an engineer. And that engineer or programmer is informed by some other body. So that's the only thing I'm really scared of, is just the, over time, how it shifts things. But,
yeah.
Yeah,
it's like how Eugene has been talking a lot lately about journalism is never objective because ultimately there's a human behind the choices. Right. It's the same for algorithm. We cannot pretend that AI is objective because it was ultimately created by a human with their own biases. Good place to cap things off.
Yeah, especially because you hear that banging. I don't know if they can hear that banging.
I don't know if it's picking up.
Those are the robots. Those are the robots coming. No, I'm just joking.
Coming for us right now. Okay, so if you are interested in hearing more about MAEKAN and our membership opportunities, you can visit us at maekan.com, where we have more stories you can listen to on the sights and sounds of creative culture.
You can also subscribe to us through your favorite podcast app and platforms.
If you like this podcast, you can also do us a huge favor by reviewing us on iTunes or sharing this podcast with a friend. I'd like to say a really big thank you to Nate.
I'm not Eugene.
I'm Cherise.
And this is MAEKAN It Up.